Welcome to Silent Terror. Tonight I bring you another terrifying tale, one that will make you think twice before signing a lease. This is the story of an apartment that harbored something ancient, something malevolent, something that refuses to let go. Listen closely and remember, some places are never meant to be lived in. But stay with me, because after this chilling tale, I have another horror story that will make your skin crawl. If you think this apartment is terrifying, just wait until you hear what's coming next. David had been searching for a new place for months. The apartment on Redwood Street seemed perfect, cheap, fully furnished, and in a quiet neighborhood. The landlord, however, was oddly hesitant. "There's been incidents," he muttered. "People don't stay long." David, thinking it was just an attempt to scare him into signing quickly, laughed it off and took the deal. The first night was normal, but by the third, things began to change. It started subtly. The hallway outside his bedroom seemed longer at night than during the day. It was impossible, yet he swore it took him longer to reach the bathroom than it should have. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, just behind the walls, as if someone was speaking through the plaster. He thought it was the neighbors, until he realized the apartment next to his had been vacant for years. One night, unable to sleep, he stepped into the hallway. As he moved forward, the air grew thick, suffocating. The shadows stretched unnaturally long. And then he saw it. A door that wasn't there before. It was old, rotted, and slightly ajar. Inside, nothing but blackness, a deep, pulsing darkness that seemed to breathe. Then something moved. David slammed his bedroom door shut and locked it, heart hammering. He barely slept that night. The room that shouldn't exist. The next day, the door was gone. But something else had changed. His apartment felt larger, as if new walls had appeared overnight. He checked the layout. Nothing was different, until he saw the closet. He never had a closet there before. With trembling hands, he opened it, revealing not a storage space, but a narrow staircase leading downward. The air reeked of decay. A low hum echoed from below. He should have left then. He should have packed his things and run. But something compelled him forward. Step by step, he descended into the unknown. At the bottom, he found a room. Stone walls, flickering candlelight, and a single chair in the center. On the chair sat a figure, its back turned toward him. David opened his mouth to speak, but before he could make a sound, the figure twisted its head all the way around, grinning with a mouth too wide, filled with black, rotting teeth. "Welcome home," it rasped. The lights went out. Days later, the landlord came to check on David. He knocked. No answer. When he unlocked the door, the apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no clothes, no sign that anyone had ever lived there, except for one thing, a single wooden chair in the center of the room, and the faint sound of whispering coming from the walls. You may think this is just another ghost story, another tale to make your skin crawl. But let me ask you something. How well do you really know the history of the place you live in? Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night feeling like someone is watching you? Have you ever seen a door where there wasn't one before, or heard voices in the silence? If you have, maybe you're not alone after all. And now let me take you into another terrifying tale, one that might just be worse than the last. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear next is even more disturbing. If you thought the last story was disturbing, this next one will make you question every sound you hear at night. Tonight, I bring you the story of an apartment where the horror didn't come from inside the walls, but from above. Some neighbors you should never meet. When Lisa moved into the Maplewood apartments, she was relieved to find a quiet, affordable place. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe, or so she thought. Her unit was on the top floor, at least that's what she was told. The landlord made it clear. "There's no floor above yours, just an old storage area that's been locked for years." So when she heard footsteps coming from upstairs on her first night, she assumed it was a mistake. Maybe another tenant had access. Maybe the landlord had lied. But then came the dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor, directly above her bed. Every night it got worse. Footsteps pacing, furniture scraping, whispers so faint she couldn't make out the words. She asked her landlord again about the floor above, but he insisted, "There's no one up there." One night the sound of something dropping, a deep, heavy thud, shook her ceiling so violently that dust rained down from the cracks. She ran outside looking for any light in the supposed empty space above. Nothing. She wasn't alone, though. An old woman from the apartment next door stood outside her unit, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. "You hear them too, don't you?" the woman whispered. "You should leave." Lisa swallowed hard. "Who's up there?" The woman shook her head. Not who. What? Determined to get answers, Lisa decided to check the attic herself. She found the locked door in the hallway, but the rusted chain wrapped around it was so thick it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. If no one could get in, then what was making the noise? That night, as she lay in bed, something changed. The noises weren't coming from above anymore. They were coming from inside her apartment. She sat up, heart hammering. A slow creaking sound filled the room. Then she saw it. A small, circular hole had appeared in her ceiling, and something was looking through it. Lisa couldn't move. A single, unblinking eye, large, glossy, and inhuman, stared down at her. She could hear breathing, slow and ragged, as if whatever was up there had been waiting for her to notice. Then the whispers started again. But this time they were in her room. She bolted for the door, yanking it open just as the ceiling above her groaned, the wood straining as if something massive was shifting its weight. She didn't look back. She didn't want to see what was coming down. The next morning she went straight to the building manager. "I need to see the attic," she demanded. "Now!" The old man's face turned pale. "There is no attic," he muttered. "The building was built without one." Lisa felt ice flood her veins. She turned, sprinting back to her apartment. She had to see it again, to prove she wasn't losing her mind. But when she stepped inside, she looked up and froze. The hole in the ceiling was gone, and so were the noises. That was the last night Lisa stayed in that apartment. She moved out within days, never looking back. But every so often, when she's in bed late at night, she still hears it. The soft creaking of wood, the faint whispering just beyond her reach. Because some things don't live above you. So far, we've uncovered haunted apartments and strange noises from above. But what if the horror wasn't coming from ghosts? What if it was something worse? This is the story of apartment 703, a place where people move in, but never move out. James had just moved to the city for a fresh start. His new apartment was in an old but well-kept building, the kind with an eerie charm. The neighbors were polite but distant, avoiding eye contact in the elevator. The landlord, Mr. Grayson, seemed relieved when James signed the lease. The only rule? Never, under any circumstances, speak to the man in 703. James laughed. "You mean, don't bother my neighbor?" Mr. Grayson's face darkened. I mean don't acknowledge him. Don't look at him. Don't answer if he knocks." James assumed it was just a cranky old tenant and agreed. But as the days passed, his curiosity grew. Apartment 703 was at the end of the hall, its door old and unmarked. James never saw anyone go in or out, and yet he could hear someone moving inside at night. The knocking begins. It started with soft knocks at odd hours, at 1:03 a.m., at 3:07 a.m., always rhythmic, deliberate. One night he heard whispers outside his door, faint, garbled words like someone talking through water. Then came the scratching, slow, deliberate. James told himself it was just an old building settling, but deep down, he knew better. One night, after a long shift, James was unlocking his door when he heard shuffling behind him. He turned without thinking and locked eyes with the man from 703. His skin was too pale, his lips stretched in an unnatural smile. His clothes were clean but old-fashioned, like he had stepped out of another time. James felt paralyzed. "Hello," the man whispered. His voice was wet, unnatural, like something trying to sound human. James remembered the warning. Don't talk to him. Don't acknowledge him. Heart pounding, he turned away and stepped into his apartment, locking the door. The knocking started immediately. Harder, louder, more frantic. Something's wrong. The next morning, James went straight to the landlord. "There's something wrong with 703, he said. Mr. Grayson's face went pale. "You spoke to him, didn't you?" James hesitated, then nodded. The landlord swallowed hard. "Then he's going to want more." That night, James barricaded his door. But at 3:07 a.m., he woke up to something new. The sound of his door unlocking. From the inside, the knob twisted and the door creaked open. James grabbed his phone's flashlight, pointing it toward the doorway. The man from 703 stood in his apartment. Closer now, grinning. James bolted for the front door, but the hallway outside was wrong. The lights flickered, the walls seemed to stretch. And then he saw them. Other tenants, standing motionless in the hallway, eyes empty, mouths open but silent. He ran. But no matter how far he went, every door led back to his own apartment, and the man from 703 was waiting inside. Days later, the landlord let himself into James's apartment. Empty. No furniture, no clothes, no trace of anyone ever living there. With a heavy sigh, Mr. Grayson walked to the end of the hall and knocked on 703. The door creaked open. Inside, a shadow moved. A new voice whispered from the darkness. "Hello." James was never seen again. No one ever moves out of apartment 703. But the knocking continues, so if you ever find yourself in a strange apartment with odd rules, follow them, because some doors should never be opened. This has been Silent Terror. If you enjoyed this horrifying tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And remember, some neighbors should never be acknowledged.